Howdy y'all, welcome back to the channel. I have something interesting for you today, and I'm gonna present it to you in a sort of train of thought way, where I show you how one thing sort of led to another when I was just doing some simple research, and I came across some really interesting things. So let's start at the beginning. I was watching baseball, and I made a video about a week or two ago about the old world of Pittsburgh. And one of the things that I did not include in that video that I meant to was this view that you get of the city of Pittsburgh from PNC Park. And PNC Park is the stadium that the MLB team plays in. Now, I wanted to do some research into this area of land and what stood here before PNC Park, because PNC Park, it says, according to the narrative, opened in 2001. So I was wondering what sort of building was here beforehand, because this is a really awesome area. It's sort of perfect for where a fort would be or something along those lines. But what I came to find is the last thing that was here before PNC Park was actually another stadium, and this was Three Rivers Stadium. And before I could dive even further back into the history, I saw something about Three Rivers Stadium that was really interesting to me, so I had to click and read a little bit more about it. And that's that this stadium, Three Rivers Stadium, actually had a specific type of field or grass or surface that the players would play on, and this was known as tartan turf. So obviously, because of my never-ending interest in Tartary, I had to click on this and find out more about it, because I'd never really heard about this before. And now when you click on tartan turf, you're really just redirected to astroturf and to basically turf in general, and the whole idea of having a fake surface or this artificial grass being used as a field. But I didn't find a lot about why it was called tartan turf. So I did a little more digging, and I came to find that this was supposedly created by the 3M conglomerate. And this 3M conglomerate or 3M company actually owns Scotch brand, and it owns a bunch of other companies apparently. But sometime, it doesn't have a specific date given, but sometime in the 1960s, they developed this sort of artificial grass that they decided to call tartan turf, and they were the ones that are given credit for coming up with this name. So it's written that they decided to call it tartan turf because it was indestructible and that it could survive in any weather. So I think that's sort of revealing to the whole idea of naming things tartan, and all these things that seem to pop up in the 1800s and the early to mid 1900s, where we were naming things tartan this and tartan that. And if you look at them, singularly, you can't really see the connection. But if you look at all these things as a whole, you start to see that it's sort of a rub in your face from the higher ups or the people who run these companies, kind of the people with knowledge. It seems to be that they were sort of putting it in plain view, the history that they knew about. And I think that's why they even refer to this as indestructible and all weather, and that means tartan to this 3M company that came up with this name. And another tie that I made in my head when I read about this is that one of the facts that they had about this original tartan turf is that to make it, they needed to include mercury. So they needed to actually take the element of mercury and somehow spin it within these other materials to create this fake grass that they would use in any weather that was indestructible. And they decided to name it after tartan. So it's just all these little things that I found really interesting. We already have a lot of ties, and I've seen other videos and I've read a few books about free energy and things of that nature, and it always seems to involve mercury, and it always seems to be tied back to the area of not only what we would refer to as Tartary, but in later ages, Germany and places close to that area. So I think it's really interesting that we have all of these discoveries popping up, and they all sort of have this relation to the old world that we've talked about in previous videos. So I found that to be really fascinating, and the narrative was interesting enough, but I wanted to find more information. So I went on to Google and I typed into the Google search tartan turf, and really it's just a lot more information and photographs of artificial turf and things of that nature. And interesting enough that artificial turf was originally known as tartan turf. That is a fun fact. But I wanted more information that I could find. However, I was recommended with more photographs and information about other stuff that was named tartan this and tartan that. And I didn't really realize all the different things that kind of have a tartan origin, at least if we look at their name. Now, one of the images was a mummy, and it says this is a mummy that was dressed to the T in tartan attire. And if you're not familiar with tartan attire, it's really associated in modern times with Scotland and Scotland during the Middle Ages. And you see it's really similar to plaid. But tartan is actually a very important design that goes back many centuries. So interestingly, I clicked on this photograph, and I'm really glad that I did, because what I come to find is that this is actually a mummy that was above average size. They say he was about 6.5 feet tall, and he was buried in a burial mound. And this burial mound is really similar to the ones I've talked about in the Old World series that we found all throughout the United States of America. Now, many of the ones in America were either destroyed or built on top of, but there are a few remaining photographs of some of the more well-known ones that existed. But I do find it to be of particular interest that we find these same sort of burial mounds and the burial services, the same exact ways of burial, being used all across the world around the same time periods and even far earlier than that. Now, they say this tomb or this burial mound was actually found in China, and it was from the Bronze Age. So we're talking about 1200 BC, around that time period. And this mummified remain, besides being above average stature, he's also said to have bright red hair and blue eyes. So we're going to look into his attire just a little bit. I'm going to include some of these images. Hopefully these are okay with you guys, but these images are really interesting to me because they show that this man is dressed in what we would associate with Scotland tartan plaid. And it's really interesting because the same sort of clothing that this man is wearing is being associated with the old ancient Scythian culture. So this man in these mummified remains is actually said to be part of a larger group of mummies that was found in this area of China. And every single one of these mummies had some sort of attire or piece of clothing or another material with them that would tie them together to what we would call the ancient old world Scythian culture. So we're just going to look at some of these images really quick because, again, this is a burial mound that was discovered in China, and these were discovered all throughout time, but most of them were discovered around the 1950s and the 1960s. So right around the time that we have this push of tartan materials in the United States, like the tartan turf, we also have tartan discoveries being found all throughout the world, including these really awesome and unique mummified remains. Now, these are known as some of the most important remains in Chinese history, to the point, and I'll include some of this just so it can be proven. I want to show the actual images that the narrative gives, but these remains and all of these mummies are off limits to any scientist outside of China. So no one besides residents of China that adhere to the history that China wants to represent are allowed to view these remains and make documents of them. So to share these photographs with you, these are probably some of the only photographs of these mummified remains that exist on the internet. And I just think it's really interesting, why would China want to hide what was going on in this ancient burial mound unless it revealed something that kind of countered what the official narrative was? So I'm just going to leave these images with you, and then I'm going to show you some more stuff that is sort of tied together with this burial mound, because this led me to something even more interesting that I thought we needed to discuss. So of all of the remains that were found in this Tarim basin of the Taklamakan desert in China, I think the most famous or infamous, at least in the esoteric circles, would have to be the witches of Subeshi. And we're going to get into that in just a little bit. But what's interesting also, when I was doing this reading, I actually came to find that the Taklamakan Desert is actually the Uyghur Autonomous Region. And I don't like to get political in my videos, but I do find it very interesting that in this old world area that was once known as Subeshi, so that's where these witches, quote unquote, get their names from. That's where these mummies get the name of the witches of Subeshi. Subeshi was actually an old world city that is basically a mystery city because no one knows where the remains of the city actually are. But they're saying that Subeshi itself was very important in bringing Buddhism to China. And the fact that they're decimating these lands and then forcing people to live there is just not right. And it goes to this whole idea that they're still trying to cover up this history by forcing basically these camps and these people to stay there. So it's just mind-blowing to me. And when we get into what I'm about to talk about, it's even more interesting because we have these mummified remains in the Taklamakan Desert, and we have these witches of Subeshi, and they're known as witches because when you think of a modern day witch, like a Halloween costume or what you would see depicted in the United States, you think of, maybe riding on a broom, maybe having a cauldron, and you think of the large witch's hat or the witch's cap. Now, I've made previous videos about head attire, and one of the most interesting pieces of ancient head attire, at least to me, is the Phrygian cap. And the Phrygian cap was brought to the world, at least according to many historians, by the people of Scythia. So again, we're tying these mummified remains back to Scythia, back to this one world nation, or this large group of people, of quote-unquote Scythians, that used to reside on really all parts of the world, it seems. Now, I say that because these mummified women found in Subeshi actually were wearing large caps, and these caps actually became known as witches' caps. So when you see a depiction of a witch, it is most of the time being associated with the ancient world or the old world and magi or magic. And anyone who was a magi would wear a cap like this. And these witches were wearing massive, what we would call witches' hats. They were anywhere from 2 to 4 feet long, depending on which mummy you were looking at. And their whole attire is reminiscent of this idea that we have of the ancient world or the old world Scythian. And I just think it's really, really interesting. And I had to focus on the cap itself because I wanted to find out exactly where the idea comes from. Now, was it something that was introduced to the public by someone with knowledge who knew about these mummified remains and knew about the ancient magi's? Most likely. And I went into looking into these magi hats or these magic hats because all of my research is just you click on one thing, you read one thing, you read another thing, and then you're on to the next subject. So I'm reading about these magic hats, and I come to find that there are 4 golden magic hats that are associated not only with esoteric nature, but in a sort of James Bond or Raiders of the Lost Ark sort of sense. They're actually something that the richest men of the world have been chasing after for centuries. And this is something that's really crazy to me because it reads like a story right out of a bad movie or an action movie. But apparently there was a cult, and this is according to the current narrative. There was a cult at some time during the Bronze or Iron Age, and this cult is said to have been all around the entire world. Now, it's written in the narrative, and I'll include it here so you believe me, but it's written in this narrative that this cult that they don't know anything about apparently had magi's, and these magi's would construct these golden caps, these golden magi hats, and these hats were 3, 4, 5 feet tall, and they were made out of one piece of solid gold. So this is not gold pieces put together. Each one of these caps is one solid piece of gold that is carved out, and it's made to be the most intricate, probably, piece of golden artwork or golden jewelry that you can really think of. Now, in the ancient world, these were much sought after, just like there were different golden crowns and golden caps and golden armor that actually existed throughout time. And from what I was finding, many of these have been quote unquote lost. And it's just funny to think how many of these are actually in private collections or in private families around the world. But from what I read, there was a hunt for this golden armor. So really, it does read much like a movie. And I never heard about this before, but apparently there are 4 golden witches' hats or golden magic hats that existed in the Bronze Age, and they were worn by the leaders of a cult that stretched all around the world. Now, these 4 magic golden hats apparently each have the ability to predict weather and to tell the date and time. Now, I didn't really know how that would be possible, so I read into it, and apparently each one of the circles on this hat is a day of the lunar cycle. So it counts for basically a day of the year. And somehow the wearer of the hat, or whoever was in possession of the hat, would be able to use this and use the sun and tell exactly what part of the lunar cycle they were at. So I don't know if this only was done by the Magi's themselves, and I don't know if this is what was the magic or what was considered to be making these hats and the men who wore them magic, but it is super interesting to note that they have solid gold hats that were made by hand over 3,000 or roughly 3,000 years ago, and they predicted the lunar cycle. So that's what I wanted to present to you today. I wanted to show you these magic golden hats. I wanted to ask you if you've ever heard about these. I wanted to show you my train of thought, how I started from PNC Park in Pittsburgh all the way to magic hats in the Iron Age. So just really interesting stuff. I certainly believe that these hats probably have much more of an esoteric history that we don't really understand yet. I could imagine if they were built or created so finely detailed that they could predict the exact lunar cycle and the lunar pattern, that there's probably even more built into them, much like when we look at the ancient astrolabes and things like that, that could read all different sorts of lunar cycles and bodies in the sky. I believe that these hats probably had even more functions that might have to do with other antiquitech and other sorts of energy transfer. So I just found it really interesting. All these different things that sort of tie to the old world. We have tartan turf that's made with mercury. We have this tartan name that's being used all throughout the 18 and 1900s. We have the tartan pattern that's associated with the red-haired men from Scotland. But at the same time, we have the Scythians that were red-haired men and women who wore this tartan plaid. And they basically have ruins and mounds and ancient burial sites that are much like the sites of the Native Americans and the other native peoples found all throughout the world. And now we're finding similar remains in all of these sites, but we're still being told there's nothing here. None of these things are related. There is no Tartary. There was no Scythia that stretched all across the world. It was just a simple country. And that's just what we're told. So I just want to make this video, share these things with you, hear your thoughts down below, and say thank you so much for being here.